Makers, this is another project I made for the Tim Holtz Eclectic Elements Laboratory Halloween fabric release for 2024. And I used this pattern, Threads That Bind, by designer Sean Williams. And there are 5 pumpkin patterns in here. And we chose to do this one, and this one from this pattern. Now I'm doing things a slightly bit differently than in the pattern. It comes in a huge piece of paper, and they ask you to trace these onto freezer paper and then onto your projects. But so you can see it's a huge piece of paper, right? And I haven't even completely undone it yet. So but it does have all 5 of the pumpkins on there and all of the directions for you to follow to be able to make these. However, I'm gonna some of them seemed a little too difficult for me, not being an actual person that sews, and so I altered this to make it work for me. And I think it'll work out. I'm hoping. So I took my pattern and I ran it off, and so you can do that at, you know, Kinko's or FedEx or Office Depot or wherever you have any store that makes copies. And so if you fold it just right, you can fit it so that it will run off on 11 by 17, and you'll be able to get the whole thing in. All right, so the small one is here, and it comes with where you leave the opening. It has a stem on here. It shows you that you have to gusset the bottom so that it will sit flat on the pumpkins. The pumpkins will sit flat this way. And also the faces. Now, the way that this is different, you might have looked at it and thought, oh, they just put, some felt or something on the face. But actually, what they did was to cut away the fabric and reveal a thin white or cream section and then a black section behind. So then they cut that thin section out as well. So if you look carefully, you can kind of see that they've cut away the fabric, and then they have that thin little white layer, and then they have the black felt behind. I personally was intimidated by this and wasn't sure I was going to be able to do it. And so I almost decided, you know what, I'm chickening it out, and I'm just going to cut the mouth and iron it on, glue it on and call it good. And same thing with the eyes, nose, and everything like that. But I decided to go ahead and challenge myself. And so here's what I did with each one. I ran these off 3 times just for good measure, but really I only ended up needing 2. One I kept whole like this, and the other one I cut the stems out of. And then, so each one has the stems. So on the second one I cut out the stems, and then I cut out on the outer line on each eyes, nose, and mouth on each one. I cut out that whole piece, and then that allowed me to then lay it onto fabric like this, and then I drew on it with my heat erasable pens for fabric. So these should erase once I heat it with an iron or something like that. And so once I had it drawn on there, I cut some wool felt. So I ordered wool felt in neutral colors, and I decided to use black and cream for this. So I have in here cream and black. And so I just cut it big enough that it's going to be behind the eyes, it's going to be behind the nose, and it's going to be behind the mouth. And then I pinned it down. And what I'm going to do first, before I do anything, is just to take this first piece, and I'm going to just sew a straight stitch all along where I have drawn that line for the nose, the eyes, and the mouth. I'll just sew around it. And then I'm going to take my scissors and I'm going to go in and I'm going to trim close to it. And what that will reveal will be the cream layer. And then I'm going to take, and I'm going to, the part that I cut out, the mouth that I cut out, I'm going to cut along the inside line where the black would be. And I'm going to save that part, and I'm going to fit it in here. And I'm going to draw along the outside, and I will stitch around that as well. In the cream color, I'm going to use cream thread for that so that it matches this felt. And then I will cut along that edge as well. And then that will reveal the black underneath. All right, so I'm going to do that for each one of them. So each one, and these are big pumpkins. Look how big these are. So this is the smallest one. Look how big this is. It's huge. And let's see if I can measure it for you. It is, that's 12, 14. So it's 15 and a half long. Isn't that funny? And 9 inches tall. And then this one is 15 inches tall. Now, of course, once you sew around it and you have the gusset at the bottom, it's not going to be that tall. So it will be much shorter, but regardless. So I'm going to do the same for the mouth, and eyes, and nose on each of the 3 of these. And here's what they look like so that you can see I've already done all the work. And I just need to sew now. So here's my felt for this one. This is the tall one. And it may be hard for you to see, but I can see it, the eyes that I've drawn in, the nose, and the mouth. And then for this one was really hard to see on, so I used the white pencil. And it's, again, it's supposed to go away with heat. So there I have all of those parts drawn in, and I have my felt on the back. All right, so my next thing to do is just to sew those pieces on the front part of the face, get the face done, and then I'll turn it right sides together and sew it, leaving the opening for this and with the gusset. So I'll take you through each of those steps as we go. So let's go ahead and let's get making some pumpkins. All right, so here I'm just pretending to cut, but I wanted to show you what I did, and I only had one hand to cut with and one hand to video with. So what I'm doing is showing you that I used my scissors and I cut away the fabric right up next to where I sewed on the line that I drew from the patterns that I showed you. So I cut out that zigzag mouth, I drew it on there, and then I stitched. You can see that stitching on the laboratory fabric, and then I have the felt showing through. Now on the nose, you can see that I've already cut away not only the fabric, but I've also cut away that white layer of felt to reveal the black layer underneath. On the mouth, I haven't done that yet, so the white layer of felt is still solid. But I snipped a little hole, and then I stuck the scissors underneath, and I cut away that layer, leaving just a little hand cut mat area, or that thin bit of white felt all along on both sides of the mouth. And again, I'm pretending to cut, but I'm showing you how I carefully cut away not only the fabric, but the white felt so that it would leave just that little bit and then reveal the black underneath. And then I had to go through and I had to get all the little extra bits off. And I also cleaned up the cut after I had gotten the initial centerpiece out. I went through with my scissors, and like on that one, I cut the little bit that was hanging off, trimmed up any little bits of fuzz that were left. And then I used kind of a fuzz cleaner to get all the fuzz off. Now, I originally drew the eyes, the nose, and the mouth with some ink that was supposed to be uh, disappearing ink when you heat it. And so I wanted to see if it disappeared, and look at that. Sure enough, it did. So the white ink is gone. And all I had to do is just put my little iron over it, and it went away. And it did that in all colors, even the red one. I tested them all. So I'm very happy. I'll put a link in the description of this video for those pins. I got them off Amazon. I am sewing this up, and so I have to do this one-handed because I don't have anything to hold my camera. But when you're making the gusset for the bottom of these, which is indicated here, what you're doing is you're taking the bottom seam and you are kind of pulling the front and the back of the pumpkin apart so that you can flatten the bottom seam against the side seam. And you want to line them up so that the bottom seam is going right along with the side seam. And when they are aligned, and what I do is I just kind of move it over so that I can feel that they are lined up. And then once you get them lined up, you can kind of flatten it out like that and sew across it at 3/4 of an inch. And so that's going to be where I'm going to sew across it, and it'll end up being about 1.5 inches long. And so that means the width of the bottom of the pumpkin will be about 1.5 inches wide for it to sit on once you do this on both corners at the bottom of the pumpkin. So I'm lining this seam with this seam, and then this corner is what I have right here once I've done that. And that's what's gonna make the gusset, all right? So now you can see I've sewn across the bottom, and here is the side. And you can see that they're lined up. So I've sewn across, that's about 1.5 inches on both sides. I'm gonna trim this, and then I'm gonna turn it inside out, and then this will be the bottom of the pumpkin. I wanted to show you the gusset on this one. So I did the same thing, lined up the bottom with the sides and then sewed across it to make that a flat place where it can sit. Turned inside out, this is what it looks like, and you can see how the bottom and the sides are aligned, and then I've sewn across that to make the flat bottom area. And so what I'll do next is stuff these. To do that, what I start with is filling from the top opening with some weighted pellets. I will put a link for the weighted pellets in the description here, but I put the pellets in the bottom and then I stuffed them with fiberfill. I also sewed the stems and then I stuffed those and I glued them into place to hold them temporarily. And then I used my invisible stitching that, as we all know, is not invisible because I'm not very good at it. I'm getting better, but that's how I held the stems in place. And then that was pretty much it. I did go ahead and sew some buttons on the eyes, but there really wasn't much else to this. Now, as you're seeing some close-ups, I want to point out that originally I had sewn around the eyes, nose, and mouth with one stitch, just one regular machine stitch. But on the little pumpkin, you had to sew around the eyes, and the eyes are little tiny circles, as you can see. And I was not good at it. And in fact, the eyes are the same size on the pattern, but you could see that my eyes are two different sizes, and that's okay. It adds to the wonkiness. But because of that, I didn't stitch very well, and so I decided to use my Halloween stitching that I use on my cards and just go crazy and stitch over it 4 or 5 times. And so I decided I liked it and I did that on all the pumpkins. Now, when you are cutting away the white fabric on the small green one and this large one, you need to be sure that you draw in the teeth so that when you're cutting away that white fabric, you definitely have the teeth marked so that you can cut those away too and not cut them off. So I accidentally cut these teeth off because I didn't have them marked, but I just glued them back into place and nobody can tell. So I want to thank you so much for following along. I hope you love these pumpkins as much as I do. All the links are in the description, and I hope you have a very creative day.